Buonasera a tutti, benvenuti. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us in person and online for the first of many cultural events this February. My name is Emanuela Ciriotti. I am a program and event coordinator at the ICS. And tonight it's with pleasure that I give a warm welcome to our special guests, Laura Benedetti and Donatella Melucci, who will discuss A Country of Paper, the English translation of Laura Benedetti's novel, Un Paese di Carta. I start introducing Donatella Melucci, who is a teaching professor at Georgetown University. And Donatella is also a professional translator and a writer, and she also a board member of the Italian Cultural Society. And now I go ahead, and Donatella, I'll leave you the word so you can introduce our special guest.
Absolutely. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here with us. And let me introduce you, Professor Laura Benedetti. She is the chair of the Department of Italian at Georgetown University. She's the author of numerous volumes and essays that cover 700 years of Italian literature, from Dante to Elena Ferrante. A Country of Paper, initially published in Italy in 2015, has been then translated into English, and it's actually a rewriting of the novel to make it more pleasant to an American audience. And this was her first novel, and her second novel is Secondo Piano, Second Story.
Thank you very much. Thank you to everybody for being here. Thank you also to everybody who is online. This is my first hybrid event, so please let us know if you cannot hear well, if there are any problems. You can put your questions in the Q&A section, and we'll get to those at the end. But in the meantime, I don't know if there a way for them to let us know if things don't work.
Yes,
they can raise their hand.
Okay, you can raise your hand and let us know if something is not going right. Thank you.
And again, feel free to write comments and questions in the Q&A section. So we can get started. Thank you, Professor Benedetti, for being here and presenting your book. I found this a very nice book. It's a very nice story, rich of Italian culture and history, and it is a story of introspection, a story of fulfillment, a story that entails cultural identity, and it relates to a lot of people like me, like Laura, who came from Italy or from another country to the United States. So let me start with a quotation that actually introduces the book, because it is the core of, in my opinion, of this book. It's a quotation from Italo Calvino that you will find inside the cover of the book. What you read and what you experience in life are not two separate worlds, but one single cosmos. Every life experience, in order to be interpreted properly, evokes your readings and blends into them. That books always derive from other books is a truth which is only apparently in contradiction with the other truth. That books derive from practical experience and from our relations with other people. So my question to Laura now is, what inspired you to write this novel?
Okay, well, thanks. That's probably the best part of the book, is that quote from Italo Calvino. Incidentally, 2023 is the 100th anniversary of Italo Calvino's birth. So what inspired me to write that book? Well, I had been thinking about this book for a long time. you may recall that when Domenico Starnone came to DC in one of his talks, he said that for one of his books, Ties, he had one image in mind and the conclusion. And for a long time, he didn't know how to link the two. And he said, the beauty and all the suffering of writing is about creating those links. Well, in my case, I had an idea in mind. The idea is the idea of a country of paper. So at the beginning, that was the idea of the gap between Italy as cultural heritage and Italy today. This is mostly because of my job, I think, in the sense that I have the privilege of dealing with the best that Italy has offered throughout the centuries. And sometimes I feel the pain when I compare that to Italy today. Just the other day, a colleague of mine had convinced me that I had to watch the Festival di Sanremo, for instance. So I was preparing my class, I was reading Vittoria Colonna, and I was watching Festival di Sanremo on my cell phone, and I really experienced that gap. I was thinking, what happened? How did we go from that to this? So this was the image. But then later on, and this is what my protagonist in the novel feels, her allegiance to Italy as a country of paper, as we could say as a cultural heritage. Then that also changed, though, in something you already said, that the idea of Italy as an imaginary construction that everybody who is far away from Italy has in some way, and that all people who are far away from their country may construct. So that was the idea. And I was playing with this idea, trying to write something. For a while, I was actually collecting articles or short stories about displacement, exile, that kind of stuff. And then at some point, I realized that this was not the topic for an essay. I had to go at this in a creative way. So this was the idea I had in my mind, the concept, and then the image I had in my mind was the scene that I had in my mind was the scene of an old woman walking along the Capitol Crescent Trail, and that's really the first scene that I wrote. In the first version of the book that was not published, that was the scene that opened the novel. We are in Bethesda, so perhaps many of you know the Capitol Crescent Trail, this beautiful bike path that goes from downtown Bethesda to downtown DC, basically, and that I was thinking about this woman walking along the path, accompanied by the ghosts of the people who were dear to her during her life. And in fact, since we are talking about that, perhaps you want to introduce...
Yes, absolutely. I will definitely introduce Professor Margaret Gonglensky. Please have a seat near us. She's Associate Professor of German, Director of the German Language Program, and Coordinator of Business Language Programs at the GW Center for International Business Education and Research. Professor Gonglensky works on cross-disciplinary projects that link the study of language and culture to international business in both theory and practice. Now, Margaret will read one of my favorite pages because it's a page that should be said. It's said that there is, an event that it basically ends Alice's life, the protagonist. But it is written in such a delicate way that you don't feel pain. It's beautiful. I found it absolutely beautiful. So please, Margaret, let's read this page.
first part is the description of the Capitol Crescent Trail. Okay, good. The Capitol Crescent Trail, a bike path built over an old railroad, was crowded as usual at that time of day. Dogs, purebreds naturally, trotted along, tethered by their leashes to their proud owners. Young women unwilling to surrender to motherhood chased the dream of a perfect body, pushing their babies in jogging strollers. Commuters sped by on racing bicycles, sporting yellow windbreakers and streamlined helmets. The most determined among them carried large saddlebags packed with important documents, a change of clothes, a couple of energy bars. Now and then they glanced at their watches to make sure they were making good time. On your left, they called out as they approached, but they shouted without animosity, out of habit. The most polite even found time to utter a distracted thank you as they passed pedestrians and slower bikers and rushed toward their offices on Massachusetts Avenue, in Georgetown, even on Capitol Hill.
I should say that it's a very long scene. So at this point, one of the protagonists, Alice, who's an old woman who's very ill, has managed to escape the benevolent but oppressive attention of her family. And so she started her last walk along the Capitol Crescent Trail. And now she sees a number of people that were dear to her during her life. And so the scene is very long, so we'll just skip to the last part of that scene when she sees a man that she met when she was young.
At the end of the tunnel, a familiar presence sends shivers down her spine. It's Eric with his torn jeans and indigo t-shirt, smiling his ironic smile, his blonde head leaning slightly to one side. He's stretching out his thumb, asking for a ride. How can Alice say no? She slows down. Eric's smile is now triumphant. He turns around and heads toward the river, as if forgetting about her. But she's tired of elusive encounters and fleeting ghosts, and without a second thought, runs after him. The ground around the path is not landscaped. It's slippery, rugged, full of creepers, smooth moss, fallen trees. Alice realizes she is barefoot, though she can't tell whether she just lost her slippers or left them by her bed earlier on. Her flannel leggings are torn and muddy. She scrapes her hands as she reaches for branches, bushes, anything that might slow her descent toward the river. When she finally stops on the banks of the Potomac, Eric has once again disappeared. Exhausted and frustrated, she tries to catch her breath as she looks around. Hi there. Unlike Alice, Eric does not look tired at all. He smiles at her as he sits on the grass with his usual casual air, the expression of a man who is not yet home and is already planning his next journey. Long time no see, he reproaches her with a smile. I was beginning to think you'd never make it. She moves closer. I'm sorry I'm late, she thinks of telling him. I got distracted. Half a century goes by in the blink of an eye. Why don't you sit down? Alice bends over with great caution, as she learned in physical therapy. First one knee, then the other. She tries to move closer to Eric, but the sloping ground is tricky, and she ends up flat on her back. The shape of the few clouds above her reminds her of the ceiling above her bed. She's not uncomfortable, but how could she possibly get back on her feet now? They were wrong, all of them. You did great. How is our little girl doing? She's fine, very well, actually. She's so beautiful, our Jane, so confident, so grown up. We're grandparents, you know. We have 3 grandchildren, and our eldest granddaughter is pregnant. We'll be great grandparents soon. She's not sure whether she's actually told him all of that, or these are just her thoughts, and she searches for clues in his reaction. Parenting, grandparenting, great-grandparenting, these are strange notions for a guy in his 20s. She wouldn't want to upset him. But if Eric has heard her, he doesn't seem to mind being almost a great-grandfather. He smiles as he slowly combs the grass with his fingers. Once in a while, he lifts his eyes and looks at the river shimmering just a few yards away. The fog has dissipated completely. It's going to be a glorious autumn day. Alice is beaming with delight and trembling with fear. Now he will realize I'm old, she thinks. She's suddenly concerned about her looks and her age. She leans on her elbow and lies on one side, surreptitiously checking the condition of her flannel pants. She cannot believe her eyes. Her legs emerge from under a miniskirt, and they are firm and tanned, the legs of a person who has never set foot in a gym, but has walked all over out of desire and curiosity. She's not seen those legs in a while, and she bends her knee just to watch the muscle flex under the tight, smooth skin. When she overcomes her surprise, she realizes that Eric has gotten very close, so close he is practically leaning on her. Alice recognizes that unforgettable smell of wet underbrush and salty mist and follows his lips as they move towards hers until they are so close they become blurry and then invisible. Kissing her with my soul upon my lips, it suddenly took flight.
And this is Alice. This is the scene when Alice dies. And it happens in Maryland, a place that is very familiar to you because you live there and you actually ride, right, through this trail. So Alice is the grandmother as one of the main characters. And then the story evolves through her daughter, Jane, and her granddaughter, Sara. Can you tell us the relationship? They have a complicated relationship. Can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, without saying too much about
Without saying too much. We
about
want
the
you
book.
to read it.
It is indeed a female genealogy. Alice was born in Italy, in L'Aquila, in 1930. And then her daughter, Jane, who was born in Bethesda in 1958. And then Sara, who is Jane's daughter and Alice's granddaughter, who was born in 1992. So just to give you an idea about the way this is structured, very complex relationship among the three. Sara, so the youngest one, is very close. She loves her grandmother and has a very conflictual relationship with Jane, with her mother. Something else that I think
No, this is enough for now. It is enough for now. So we saw Alice, the last scene of Alice, but Alice actually stays with us throughout the book. She actually talks to us in the book, which is very funny. She has a beautiful sense of humor. We actually laugh reading what she tells us in the book. But so this is one of the scenes. This is one of the places of the book. Then the book takes us to Utah, to Moab, and Sara meets a friend, Una, and there is this story of this study of stars. So what does this have to do with the book?
Yeah, well, the book starts in Bethesda, but then there are two journeys. One west in Utah, and then later on the one east towards Italy, towards L'Aquila. So two very different spaces. So the one in Utah is marked by nature, by the natural environment. For Sara, who is a very urban, she's a city girl, it's an absolute discovery. And so there are spaces, the star, the moon, that starts gaining importance. Is very important. It's a very important theme in the novel. The theme of the moon is also on the cover of the book. And then there is the journey east, where the environment is fairly claustrophobic, but actually there is a very strong sense of history. Perhaps it's a bit banal, but what you feel there is the depth of history rather than the open space.
Then each place in the novel is a place of introspection. People grow in this, in each space. They reveal themselves. They understand themselves. Going back to then the other place is L'Aquila, where Sara is supposed to bring Alice's ashes. And we talk about L'Aquila later. Let's take a step back. Now this book. Now let me give you a reason why we translated this book. I knew that Laura wanted to translate the book, so I teach a course in Italian translation. So I offered her to translate the book into English because I really like it. I think it's rich of culture. It's rich of historical information, and it relates a lot to me as an Italian immigrant to the United States. So it was a very nice project to bring to the students, so they learned about Italian history and something that happens in Italy that was very important. So let's talk about cultural identity in this book. Okay, cultural identity is expressed first of all by language, because Alice teaches Italian to her daughter Jane first, and also to Sara. And there are a few lines that I would like to read about language, the importance of language, the power of language, that again, as an Italian immigrant, I feel a lot. So Alice says, language is our umbilical cord. If we hold on to it, we will never lose sight of what we are. And then Fulvio, another character, says, people who lose their language are bound to become slaves. So how is language important for our cultural identity?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think you were heroic translating this book with your students. I don't know how you did it. And so what happened, so Donatella and her students translated this book, and then they gave the text to me. I had been playing with the idea of translating the book for a long time, but this time, so after she gave me the text, I actually had a possible translation in front of me. And so then I could work on that translation, taking things out, adding more things in, and rework it, the whole thing. This was my COVID project, basically, until it gained the present shape. Now, in the Italian version, there was even more insistence on the language, really on the mechanics of Italian language. There is, for instance, a long passage about the historical past that Alice, so il passato remoto for those of you who know Italian. So Alice tries to preserve, to hang on to the historical past because she feels there is something in her past that needs to be preserved. And so the other things related to the mechanics of the language I took out from the English translation because I thought they were just too difficult, perhaps impossible to translate. But definitely, the whole book rotates into language and what can be transmitted thanks to language. It's really a central theme in the book.
Yes, it is. And how do you feel about it? How do you feel about language being your identity?
I feel very, very strongly about that. It's a constant struggle, not to lose the Italian. So absolutely, I feel it's an important part. It's the idea of un paese di carta, it's the idea of an identity that is at the same time extremely strong and yet immaterial, right? So that's
Okay. Yes, I feel the same. I feel like language represents us. My Italian language represents us. Like I also taught Italian to my children. And if, like, just to give you a tiny details, if you let me, I cannot lie if I speak Italian. I can lie if I speak English, but if I speak Italian, I cannot lie. And my children, when they don't say, Mom, I love you. They have to say, ti voglio bene, because otherwise I don't feel it. So it is very strong. So it is our native language speaks to our heart. And if I make a compliment, I'll do it in Italian. That is real, true, honest, sincere. So that's why I think that it's the language identity is very, very strong in this book, and I loved it. I loved this a lot. Then still about identity, cultural identity. People like us who went to live to another country, they cannot have a feel of loss, exile. We feel like we are exiled. We're not in our home country. And these are words that actually happen to be in the book, where there is one of the characters that will say, we will always be in exile because we are out of the womb. So
yes, yes, but it's probably a passage that Margaret could read.
Yes.
This is a scene that takes place again in Bethesda, but in Jane's house, in Jane's home after Alice's death. She has gathered the family together for a Thanksgiving celebration. This Thanksgiving celebration goes a bit wrong for various reasons, and Jane finds herself having an interesting conversation with a French woman who is basically the girlfriend of another one of her children. So she's only there for Thanksgiving. She has never met her before, but yet they have a very intimate conversation late at night. Sorry, I think he starts with "I miss her a lot," right?
Yeah.
So it's so this is Jane talking about Alice, her mom.
I miss her a lot, Jane confessed, biting her lips. It makes no sense to be in this world if there's no one left who saw you as a child. Her tone struck Valerie. Do mothers feel that way too? I mean, doesn't having children protect at least a little from emptiness, from meaninglessness? I wouldn't say so, at least not in my case. Maybe I'm not a good mother. She smiled bitterly, thinking of Sarah's reproaches, her resentment. Having children only made me more vulnerable. And then we women are always caught on this seesaw. We are mothers, we're daughters at the same time. It's not easy. Lately, I've been feeling a lot like a daughter. Do you know that spiritual? Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Here I am, I'm over 50, but I feel like that, a motherless child, and not just sometimes. Jane could not remember the last time she had spoken so openly with someone. Perhaps her mother was right to complain about the Anglo-Saxon cult of privacy. By using generic modes of politeness with everybody, by calling discretion what is only indifference, people learn to lie even to themselves. It felt good not to weigh every word for a change. And you don't have to feel like you're in exile because you left home, she continued. If you do go back, you'll find that you're still in exile. We are all in exile.
And that is exactly, thank you, Margaret. This is exactly what I was talking about. That even when we go back home, we do feel exhausted. Yeah, so it's a feeling that relates to many of us. Now, going back to our cultural identity and going back to the quotation that I read at the very beginning, we can now go to L'Aquila. Okay, so
Finally,
we go to L'Aquila. So Sara brings the ashes, Alice's ashes, to Italy, because this is it's in the will that Alice wrote that she wanted to have their ashes in Italy, and she lived for this trip. And this trip is again another discovery. Like the trip in Utah was a discovery. This one is again another trip of discovery of many things that were never said, and they were never they never said, so nobody knew. And Sara finds out that her role, her purpose is not just to bring the ashes of her grandmother to Italy, but to discover a whole new truth, which is for you to read and find out. So let's go to L'Aquila and let's see L'Aquila. Sara gets to L'Aquila 2 years after the earthquake, and she finds a place, a city that is still full of food, still destroyed. And this is the page that Margaret will read where Sara arrives in L'Aquila.
Hey, we have arrived. A sharp voice awoke Sara. She was the only one left on the bus. She jumped up and instinctively reached for her backpack. It was still there. And the rest? She hurriedly got off. The driver had already removed her polka-dotted suitcase from the baggage compartment and was back in his seat, eager to leave. She moved out of his way quickly, without knowing which direction she needed to go. She had slept soundly on the bus, comforted by the view outside the window. What a strange feeling, though. She could have sworn that someone was sitting next to her. She remembered the plan she had discussed with Jane, a taxi. In fact, there it was, a single white taxi. She hurried inside, afraid that somebody else might take it, but realizing soon after that there was no one else around. She handed the driver a piece of paper with the address, choosing not to trust her Italian for such an important task. The man stared blankly at her. Is this where you're staying? Huh? For a moment, Sara feared she had gotten off at the wrong stop. After all, she had only gone from one parking lot to another. The man rephrased his question. What is it, one of the case? What a strange inquiry, Sara thought. Of course it was a house or a casa, or as the driver had said, one of the case, houses. Yes, it's a home, a house. Or perhaps he was asking whether it was a house as opposed to an apartment. I am asking whether this is the address of one of the buildings in the Case project. The man noticed Sara's confusion, seemed to decide that she couldn't help him, and made a couple of phone calls before starting the car. Is it far? Sara asked, mindful of all the stories about charming but dishonest Italians, and determined not to be immediately taken in. 10 kilometers. Sara did not like taxis. The fear of finding herself at the mercy of a stranger, dragged to a nondescript suburb where she wouldn't be able to orient herself, gave her the courage to formulate an objection. I thought this was an address in L'Aquila. The driver raised his eyebrows. Where are you coming from? From Rome. The man looked at her, skeptical. The United States, she confessed. That's what I thought. No one lives in the center of L'Aquila anymore. Don't you read the papers in the States? There was an earthquake. The earthquake was 2 years ago, Sara retorted, determined not to be intimidated. I read that everything has been rebuilt. You didn't read very carefully, did you? Or perhaps you did, but you read a lie. The truth is that nothing has been rebuilt. Everything has been built anew. Do you know what L'Aquila means in Italian? It means the eagle. Well, L'Aquila is no more, but if you want, I can take you to our fancy shopping mall. To add insult to injury, do you know what its name is? L'Aquilone. The big eagle? The man burst into an uncontrollable fit of laughter. No, I see what you mean, but no, L'Aquilone means kite. Quite a leap, don't you think, from L'Aquila to L'Aquilone, from eagle to kite? This is the miracle you must have read about. They even had the guts to put up a sign welcoming shoppers to the new center of town, though they were forced to take it down right away. Sara was embarrassed about her mistake. She should have known better. Then again, her confusion seemed to have made the man more amenable to her. He was still smiling and muttering, the big eagle, under his breath. She decided it was a good time to gather additional information. And what about the case then? They're not houses? Well, yes and no. It's another little masterpiece of theirs. Let me explain it to you. They kicked us out of L'Aquila. Our homes are still in ruins, but they took over the land around the town and built some ugly apartment buildings. But they didn't want us to feel displaced or anything. So they thought really hard and came up with the perfect acronym, CASE, CASE. It sounds like the plural of casa, home, but actually stands for, wait, I can never get it right. Complessi antisismici, sostenibili, ecocompatibili. In Italian, it's a mouthful. Perhaps it sounds better in English. Eco-compatible, sustainable, anti-seismic complexes? Sara translated the acronym as best she could. A mouthful indeed, kind of redundant. She wasn't completely sure what it meant. Beautiful, that's just beautiful, the driver commented ironically. It sounds weird in any language, doesn't it? Pretty soon they'll try to convince me that not only am I surrounded by case, but I live in a city, a C-I-T-T-A, città. Wow, what a sweet life. What a dolce V-I-T-A.
Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you, Margaret. That was great. That was great. Yeah. Wow. That's good.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, it's great. You really brought that to life, and because the idea, the novel is also Sarah's Bildungsroman. So she's growing, but as she grows, she also finds out how her story is intertwined with the story of her family and her grandmother's story and the story of this town in ruins, you know. So there is that, and Sara is definitely the one who makes the story progress, because she moves from one place to the other, from Bethesda to Utah and then to L'Aquila. And so her quest is also a quest for authenticity, right? But she always finds that there are false images. I mean, basically, she has to learn how to distinguish what's true from what's false, right? So, and there are constant fake. She always finds fake signals. So the case, so the home, it turns into the CE, the complessi, whatever they're called. So this bizarre acronym. L'Aquila it turns into l'Aquilone, you know. The moon changes into the artificial lights in another scene. So her quest is also to understand what's true, what's real, what she should follow without being distracted by these false signals. And in this, there's also the problem that her mother is Jane, who is a bit like the queen of confusion. You know, she's the one who's constantly finding false solutions to her problems. So that's really crucial there. The cast, yeah.
In fact, and this relationship kind of difficult, complicated with the mother makes instead Sarah's relationship with her grandmother like a very strong bond. It's like a circle that closes grandmother and granddaughter. It is very nice the way they complete each other. And then in this completion, they actually involve Jane, because Jane actually ends up being in this circle very nicely. Let's talk about history. I said that I love this book because there is also history. We traveled through places, Bethesda, Utah, and Italy, but then we also traveled through time. There is an episode, a real story, that is narrated as it's a big part of this novel. And I didn't know this event. I learned about it when I read this book. It is very sad, and I will let Laura tell us what happened on September 23rd, 1943.
Yeah, it's well, I'm not surprised that you didn't know about it, because it's a mysterious episode, and actually many things are just coming to light now about this episode. So it's one of the first episodes of the resistance in Italy, So as you may recall, on September 8, 1943, there was the armistice. Mussolini at that time was a prisoner in the Gran Sasso, close to L'Aquila. And on September 12, 1943, the Germans freed Mussolini and took control of L'Aquila. And at this point, many young people from L'Aquila decided to go to the mountains and try to organize some form of rebellion or some form of resistance, also because there had been an injunction to enlist at the German headquarters. And so they left on September 22nd, 1943, and they were they were captured a day later, on September 23rd, 1943, and 9 of them were killed. The 9 that they are called in town as the 9 martyrs, the 9 martiri aquilani, the 9 martyrs from L'Aquila. It's a mysterious episode because it's a little unclear how they were captured so quickly. There was always the rumor that somebody had betrayed them. And the news of their death was kept secret until L'Aquila was liberated the following June, so in June 1944. So there was a lot of room there for me to invent something while still maintaining, historical accuracy. And that's what I did. So Sara discovers that her family history is part of the larger history of Italy and specifically L'Aquila at that time.
And although the event is actually real, Laura uses fictional names about the main characters, and of course you will discover this by reading it, because we don't want to reveal too much. Right?
Yes.
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 It's beautiful. It's a beautiful way this story enters Sara's life, and the story of the novel. Now, let's going back to cultural identity again, and remember the quote that I read at the very beginning. It says, what you read and what you experience in life are not two separate worlds, but one single cosmos. So we have, there is a lot of an element, a big element of this novel is poetry. Alice reads poetry to Sara when she is a child, and since she's a child, and she reads poetry like La Gerusalemme Liberata, the Jerusalem Delivered, or Ariosto, but also Russian poetry. They have something in common. I mean, why do we have to go to Russian poetry? They actually have un comune denominatore, something in common.
That's Russian poetry?
The theme, like there is something in common.
Ah, what is it?
And you tell me.
No, you tell me.
Okay, tell us why you bring up this Russian poetry with Torquato Tasso and Ariosto.
Okay, I can tell you about the Russian poetry, but then you tell me why you think they are related. Okay. Russian poetry, of which I know strictly nothing. Okay, but I always had a big interest. Perhaps some here or online know Angelo Branduardi's song "Confessioni di un malandrino," which is actually based on a text by a Russian poet, Yesenin. And then my chronology is a bit fuzzy, but at some point I started reading more about that. There was a novel that was published by Elisabetta Rassi, perhaps, titled La scienza degli addii, so the science of farewell. And it's a novel about what a Russian poet, Osip Mandelstam, who's very important in my novel, and his wife, Nadezhda or Nadia. And this novel really got me more interested in this whole dynamics, because Mandelstam was persecuted by Stalin, and he died in a gulag. And Nadia, so his wife, had memorized his poetry, and that's how we know some of his poetry. So the idea that Alice, who lives very much through literature, would develop, Alice, who lives very much through literature, and the boyfriend from her youth would really identify with these two characters. So Ossian Mandelstam and his wife sounded right to me. But then I had a big problem. The big problem was, is it possible, is it very similar that these two people in Italy in the 50s would know about Mandelstam, would know about the Russian poets who were persecuted by Stalin? And the question is, yes, because in 1949, Renato Poggioli, who was a professor of professor of comparative literature at Harvard, published a very important book, which is mentioned in my novel, Il fiore del verso russo, the flower of Russian poetry. It's mentioned in the book as a magnificent book that really made this poetry known to Italians. So this book then becomes this book as a physical object becomes very important in the novel, because it's a book that travels from hand to hand. It's the last book that Alice reads before dying, and somehow then it appears again in L'Aquila. Donatella doesn't want me to tell too much about the story, but it is an important. It is one of the two objects, I say, that really push the story, make the story go forward. And why? What's the link with Ariosto? Fantastic.
Well, I see Alice as a fighter for freedom. And I see that as a common theme between or among Ariosto, La Gerusalemme Liberata, and this Russian poet. This anarchic soul that Alice has, and then we also find later in another character of the book, Alessandro.
Oh, yes.
But is also the same soul that Alberto has. So it's this anarchic thread, I think, that links the poet. So why does Alice read La Gerusalemme Liberata and the Russian poetry, where there is definitely a fight for freedom? Like this woman, Nadia, who memorizes her husband's poems so that they don't get forgotten. It's an immense act of love in the fight for freedom. I saw this.
That's
way.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. I'm totally convinced.
So you will see. I know. I think we can end, right? Yes. Our interview, and so we can leave the floor to our questions.
Yeah, here, and in the meantime, we'll even try to read the very small
because it's very small.
But please, yes. So we can start here and move online.
Is there any question from the audience while Emanuela answers?
Which my cousin, anybody here?
Does anybody have a question in the audience here?
So then I'll start with the question, because I managed to read. So Kristen from Washington, D.C. says that her cousins in L'Aquila have read Un Paese di Carta. And so she's asking what are the differences. I mentioned some of the differences. There is this idea of language is more prevalent in the Italian version, in almost a technical sense. There is one episode that ends differently in the English version. I think that the thing is that I'd learned so much about this novel between the time I wrote the Italian novel and the time I wrote the English version, that I learned perhaps how to streamline certain things. So you'd be reading basically the same story, but I think it's more suited for a Anglo-Saxon, for an American audience. Sorry, I'm reading the other questions still from Kristen, who says Jane has her first name to symbolize her American identity. Oh, okay, she read it. I have is whether Jane has her first name to symbolize. Well, this is actually an interesting question about the names. Yes, for Jane. So since Alice is Alice, Alice Arienti, actually, and Jane has a totally American name, like she's Jane Westbridge. And then the granddaughter Sara has again a name that is not exclusively Italian, but it's more Italian. Okay, it's the reason why I learned so much about the novel is because I gave a number of presentations about the Italian version of the novel, and I learned so much, and from the readers, from the public. And in particular about the names, I remember that I gave a talk at a high school, and so a student, a kid, came to see me afterwards and said, well, I know why Sarah Westbridge is called Sarah, isn't it? Sorry, Jane Westbridge is called Jane Westbridge. And I said, yeah, you know, why? And he said, very surprised that I, you know, of my ignorance, he said, well, because she's a bridge to the west. I thought, cool. No, I thought really, I just wanted, because Jane is a lawyer, so I just wanted a name that sounded good for a lawyer, Jane Westbridge. But now that I think about it, it could be that she is caught in this, between the two cultures. So that made a total sense. Yes, so definitely. So before I don't know, I close the connection. John.
Yeah, I was wondering, if I remember correctly, you gave some presentations or a presentation about the novel in L'Aquila, is that right?
Yes.
So I was wondering if the readership there, the people that came to your talk, how they responded to the aspect of the martyrs, just the specific historical. Did anybody have any comments about that, or in general the way that L'Aquila is portrayed? Is there anything that surprised you about the way that they responded?
They were very welcoming. They were very, very welcoming in L'Aquila. They really embraced the novel. About the 9 martyrs, it was an occasion to start talking about them. There was actually a trial right after the war. There was a trial precisely to try to bring to justice people who had been accused of having betrayed them. Now, the proceedings of the trial were classified for the maximum extent permitted by the law. So they were just declassified. So I just had access to those documents. And so actually that really adds a certain dimension to what I did. Yes, it could, yeah. Yes, another thing about L'Aquila, of course, the book is also a snapshot of L'Aquila in 2011, 2 years after the earthquake. And it's kind of useful, I think, because certain things that happen in the novel were really happening at those dates. I mean, certain certain streets were again accessible, for instance. So it's really useful. But talking about interpretations of things in the novel, in L'Aquila, again, several when I gave presentations, and especially in high schools, and I asked, so what do you think the title means? The general consensus is it's L'Aquila. It's a country of paper. It's a town of paper because it has collapsed. So there is an idea of you know, that the title conveys a sense of being vulnerable, being fragile, that I hadn't really thought about. But then now it kind of makes sense, you know, it kind of makes sense, and so now it's part of my way of reading the title.
Yeah. There is an interesting question about Il Rosone di Collevaggio. There's a story of the necklace that gets lost, found, etc. So so it's a symbol to connect Alice and Sara and L'Aquila to each other. The necklace makes its own odyssey in the story.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Earlier on, I said there are two objects that carry two really meaningful objects, so that they carry meaning and also make the story move forward. And one is the book, the Flower of Russian Poetry, and the other one is this necklace. I'd like to point out that the novel was published way before Elena Ferrante's The Lying Life of Adults, where there is a bracelet that goes from place to place. Just so the necklace, and you mentioned Ariosto, actually, you know, is an author who loves very much these things that move around, you know, that goes from place to place. So absolutely, Il Rosone is one of those the two fetishes of the novel, the almost the magical objects of the novel, right? That allow the story to gain meaning. Absolutely.
Any questions from the audience? Yeah.
Yes, the novel is. Possiamo anche parlare in italiano.
Well, but not everybody.
I know. So I think the novel is very visual, which is amazing. It's like almost cinematographic. So to me, I see like few films right now, like the Red Violin is one, and the violin that goes from country to country, from hand to hand. That's one of the things that comes to mind. The other thing that comes to mind is Facing Windows, this film by Benedetti that talks about the Jewish quarter in Rome, and the story that intertwines with the young people and the baker and the old Jew that lives there, and nobody knows who he is until the end of the story. So it's very cinematographic, the novel. And I think that even a short story documentary would be amazing to translate to. Yeah, that's how I see it.
Thanks. That's an idea. No, but you know,
we hope
can
that with the
exactly
English
somebody
to read it. But I really like what you said, because I really relate to that, because I was able to see places and people and feel like the description that Laura offers in the book actually come to life. And even the feelings and Alice, I see Alice, she's really blunt. She's really like, she can talk about anything. She doesn't have any refrain. So it's beautiful to see her, see this character. And at the end of the book, like, again, it's just so full of images that we can actually live. I was in the book. At the end of it, both in the English, the Italian version first, and then in the English version, when I finished the book, I held on to it. Like, I was like, please don't stop, okay? Because it felt like I was in the story. I was in there. And many of the situations actually relate also to me as an immigrant, as a mother, a
It's
language.
very much like Italo Calvino's, Cavaliere Rampante.
Mhm.
More than Italo Svevo, because
Mhm.
Ah,
Italo
yeah.
was like more into stream of consciousness, but this novel in particular is very, it has a lot of images,
Yes.
and it's very powerful for that. And it's very easy to understand, it's very easy to follow, and it's very engaging.
Mhm.
Thank you, thank you. Well, Donatella doesn't want me to talk too much about the plot, but there is something that relates to what she said. So I should reveal that in the novel, then Sara discovers that her grandmother was the sister of one of the 9 martyrs. To be precise, she was the sister of the youngest one of them, who was 17 years old. The only one who was 17 years old when he was murdered. Okay, so the novel was published in 2015. And actually, so he dies, so the young man dies because there was a betrayal, because the group was betrayed in my novel, in my book. So the novel is published in 2015. Then at some point, years later, I am wasting time on the internet, as I like to do. And I come across an interview given in 2018 by the sister of the youngest of the 9 martyrs. And the title is My Brother Killed Because of a Betrayal. So my character was actually alive and giving interviews. And when I told Donatella said, well, I always knew that Alice existed. So she did, this is just, it made sense to her. This made sense.
Yeah, it did. But actually, I saw this video. I found this video before, Laura, and I showed it to the class. And I said, this should be Alice. I don't know if Martina told you, but we actually showed the video. And then Laura told me, I found the video. And I know, I know the video. And I think that's Alice. And then Laura actually met this lady from the video. And she describes things exactly the way Laura wrote it in the book. So it felt so true that one time that she presented the book, I said, who's Alice? What is she?
Exactly, who's Alice? Yeah, and I had actually other people tell me, so this was your grandmother. I said, no. Also chronologically, we're not there, but yeah. So it was just a great compliment. Which is a great compliment. Any questions? That was Fulvia.
I'd just like to ask a question about the aspect of translating the book. You know that we're reading one of our books we do for like series, her own experience of Burning Sand and so on. I was wondering if you also like had to trust another person, Laura, in translating the book. Was it like a moment in which you trembled, or was this a total trust? So how did that go? I mean, how was it for you to trust
can one not trust
I
one
didn't translate. It was
colleague?
my students who translated.
So how is the feeling of having someone translate your work?
It was great. It was very interesting also to see what the students found in the book and all of that. No, it was. Then I met with the students. It was a very nice experience. Then I did rework the book a lot because again, this seeing the translation made me realize what actually absolutely was not working in the translation. Not because of the students, but just because it didn't lend itself to the English language. So you probably, as some of you know, Amara Lacus. Amara Lacus is an Italian-Algerian writer. He wrote a novel, Scontro di civiltà per un ascensore a Piazza Vittorio, Clash of Civilizations for an Elevator in Piazza Vittorio, which is a neighborhood in Rome. But actually, the first version of that novel was published in Arabic. And so the title is completely different, Come farsi allattare dalla lupa senza che ti morda. Anyway, anyway, I consider him a friend, and so I talked to him about this, and he said that his book changed quite a bit when he rewrote it into Italian, and he really encouraged me to act the same way. He said, you know, it's your novel. You do whatever you want. If something doesn't work, you just take it out. If you think that the English public, you know, the Anglophone public needs more background information, you put it in there. So that's actually going back to one of the questions earlier on. There is more background information in the English version, which I hope it's not too didactic, but I needed more information. And my trick is that since everything is new to Sara, it's not. I don't think it's strange that people would explain to her what happened. But actually, they are not explaining that to her. They are explaining that to the American readers. You know, the historical details, all of that. Yeah. There is a raised hand, but I wish I knew how to go there.
Oh, I think this is just to confirm that everything was fine.
Okay. So are there any other questions? Ah, Letizia. Okay. Given the language is such a main identity, how do you feel about your own novel translated into another language? Namely, I think we just answered that, Letizia. I was answering to one of my colleagues, Fulvia Musti, but I think we answered that. I hope.
There is a question that is interesting there by Andrew. Sorry, right here. So, grazie a tutti. Many of the recent writers in history have written from exile, Ovid in Thomas, Dante, Fuori di Firenze, etc. And you said that you are all in exile after we leave the womb. And I was wondering if you have read Freud or Sandor Ferencz.
Yeah, I've read Freud. I've read some Freud, but I don't quite understand in this context. The passage that we read was about feeling always displaced. I mean, what Jane is trying to say is that perhaps we were not, you know, we're immigrants. So we tend to overestimate the feeling of belonging that other people who never moved have, right? I mean, you can feel displaced, and you can be to a great extent displaced even if you never left your home. That's what I was getting at in that passage. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there is also on this topic, there is also the different view between Sara and a friend that she meets in L'Aquila, where Sara says, "Oh, I mean, you can live your life wherever you are," and instead, this other friend from L'Aquila says, "No, you were born in one place. You belong to that place." Because you drank the water, you breathed the air. So there is different point of view. These are different cultures facing each other and confronting each other.
Yes, definitely. Because Sara is again trying to find her place in the world. So there are these different options that are offered to her. But in a sense, the end is kind of open, right? I mean, we don't know exactly what's going to happen to Sara once she goes back to the States. I mean, we know that to a certain extent, but we don't know much. So that here, the sequel, the Netflix series.
I was going to say the attachment that the Russian interchurch has to the land.
Yes.
Of the Serbs that are attached to the land. That's you are attached to it. And that's the same thing with others. That he tells us, you know, I was born here and this is where I belong. We can be as international as we want, with translations, with anything, but you were born in what place, and that's what she's telling us, you belong there. And, you know, that's one of the things I see in the book. against internationality. But culture is important. And that's what she's trying to say. My culture is important, even if it's small, even if it's as fragile as a piece of paper, even if my country is a piece of paper at the end with a lot of faults and bad history, good history, but still is something that I regard as my culture. And that's what she's telling us.
Okay,
Yeah.
so yeah, thank you so much, Laura and Donatella, for the very interesting
And
responses.
Margaret.
I was also going to thank Margaret for reading and literally bringing to life parts of the book. Yeah, it was very nice, very, very well read. And so thank you for taking the time to present this beautiful book. And yes,
Thank you.
members of the audience can buy a copy of the book online. There is also a link on our events page. Before closing the event, just a couple of reminders about our next events. Sunday, February 19th at 5 p.m. Join us at the AFI Theater in Silver Spring for our movie night. There is a special screening of Cinema Paradiso and also a wine reception to follow. And then Saturday, February 26th, we will host another book presentation. This time, Virginia Jewis will present her translation of Vita Nuova by Dante Alighieri in conversation with Annelise Brody Morani. So thank you everyone again for being here, for staying with us, and good night. Thank you.